All right, so are you ready to dive into some serious mystery? Today we're looking at the JFK assassination.
Oh, yeah, definitely. A classic.
And, you sent over a ton of stuff for this one. Articles, documents. Feels like I'm reading a thriller, to be honest.
Mhm.
Fingerprint analysis, transcripts from the Assassination Records Review Board. We've even got some theories about MLK Jr.'s death tied in here.
It's all connected. You can't look at these events in isolation.
Exactly. So many questions, too. Did the government actually release everything they were supposed to? And why do so many people even now believe there was a cover-up?
It's a case that just won't quit, and for good reason. The stakes were high, the evidence is messy, and the truth. Well, the truth is rarely a straight line.
Okay, well, let's jump right into that messiness then. One of the first things that caught my eye was this article about a fingerprint. A Texas research group says they've matched a print from a box in the sniper's nest to a Malcolm Wallace.
Ah, yes, Malcolm Wallace.
Honestly, I had to do some Googling. Refresh my memory, who is this guy? And why is his fingerprint such a big deal?
Wallace is a fascinating character. He was connected to Lyndon B. Johnson, and some accounts describe him as, let's just say, a tough guy, an enforcer.
Uh-uh.
If his fingerprint is genuinely on that box, it really throws a wrench into the lone gunman theory. It suggests someone else was there, someone with ties to LBJ. Potentially, it raises a lot of questions.
The article mentioned that the fingerprint analysis itself is controversial, though. What are the arguments for and against its validity?
You've got folks who believe this is definitive proof of a conspiracy. They point to the fact that these researchers used really advanced fingerprint techniques, and the match appears to be strong.
I see.
For them, this fingerprint links LBJ directly to the assassination, and it dismantles the official narrative.
Makes sense. What about the other side, though? What are their arguments against the fingerprint?
Well, the skeptics question the methodology. They point to potential flaws in the analysis. They say the fingerprint could have gotten there through other means, maybe even an innocent explanation. Some even suggest it's all a smear campaign against LBJ, a way to push a conspiracy theory.
So it's kind of a he said, she said situation then. How do we, as people just trying to get to the bottom of this, figure out what to believe?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Whenever you see evidence in a case this politically charged, you have to ask the tough questions.
Such as?
Who did the analysis? What's their background? Any biases we should know about? What was their methodology? Are there counter-arguments or alternative explanations? It's all about looking at the evidence and the arguments surrounding it with a skeptical but open mind.
Don't jump to conclusions. Don't take things at face value. Got it.
Exactly. And that's where the Assassination Records Review Board transcripts become really valuable. They give us a peek behind the curtain. We see how the people tasked with finding the truth wrestled with these same issues.
Yeah, the ARRB, I went through those transcripts and wow, dense. But there are some real gems in there. You see the debates, the clashing personalities, the tension between wanting to be transparent and needing to keep secrets.
The ARRB was created by Congress to re-examine everything, make sure all the relevant documents were released to the public.
The huge task.
Huge, millions of pages, uncooperative agencies, legal and political hurdles everywhere. It was a monumental task.
It sounds like even the board itself couldn't agree on what should be public and what should stay classified.
You can feel the tension in those transcripts. They debate redacting information, what defines an assassination record. They even talk about the potential harm of releasing some information. Really gives you a glimpse into that struggle between transparency and secrecy.
One quote that jumped out at me was from Dr. Anna Nelson. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that ideally there shouldn't have to be another board like this because what they demonstrated was that a lot of supposedly dangerous secrets were already out in the open, sitting in the National Archives. Her point was that if things were done right, declassification was streamlined, there wouldn't be a need for this kind of review in the first place.
That's a powerful statement. It suggests that secrecy, while sometimes necessary, can also be used to hide things, keep the public in the dark.
But it's not just government secrecy at play here, is it? The conference transcripts you sent paint a picture of this huge disconnect between what the public believes and the official story. Even now, so many Americans are convinced there was a conspiracy, even though the Warren Commission concluded otherwise.
There are several factors there. The media played a big role. They often highlighted conflicting accounts, fueled the suspicion of a cover-up. Plus, the assassination itself was so shocking, a young, charismatic president suddenly gone. It's easy to see how conspiracy theories would thrive in that environment.
And then you have the story of Dick Gregory, the comedian and activist. He went on a hunger strike, trying to get J. Edgar Hoover's name removed from the FBI building.
Powerful symbolism there. For Gregory, Hoover's FBI represented oppression. The assassination was a symbol of the government silencing those who challenge it.
A reminder that history isn't just facts and dates. It's about people, their beliefs, their lives. And speaking of connections, you pointed out some interesting parallels between the JFK and MLK assassinations. What were those again?
Both men were outspoken leaders. Both challenged the status quo. Both were assassinated under suspicious circumstances, and both deaths led to widespread distrust in the government and its investigations.
Let's talk about MLK specifically.
Yeah.
The article about James Earl Ray, the man convicted of killing King, raises some serious questions. Government involvement, suppressed evidence. What's the story there?
The Orders to Kill document is a big one. Supposedly, it contains instructions to eliminate King. If it's authentic, it's explosive. It suggests a high-level conspiracy to silence a major voice for civil rights.
And there's Judge Joe Brown's account. He was removed from Ray's case, and he claims it was because he pushed for a deeper investigation. He even said that no reasonable person could look at the evidence and say Ray acted alone. It makes you wonder what they were so afraid of finding, doesn't it?
It does raise the question, doesn't it? What kind of information could be so sensitive that they'd remove a judge just for following the evidence? Makes you think.
And now we're getting into some really wild territory. Hypnoprogramming and mind control. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it?
But the sources you sent suggest that Sirhan, RFK's assassin, might have been hypnoprogrammed to commit the crime. Is that even possible?
Sirhan's lawyer presents some compelling arguments. He points to the RFK Must Die notebooks, the repetitive phrases, and the testimony of Dr. Herbert Spiegel, an expert on hypnoprogramming, who suggested Sirhan was in a dissociative state during the shooting.
Hold on, is hypnoprogramming even a real thing? Can you really program someone to kill against their will and then have them not remember?
It's definitely controversial. Scientists debate how effective it actually is and how much you can control someone's actions that way. But the evidence in Sirhan's case, those notebooks, his lack of memory, it raises some disturbing possibilities.
If Sirhan was hypnoprogrammed, who was behind it? And why silence RFK? So many questions.
And those questions are exactly what keep researchers digging, keep the speculation alive. The idea of mind control as a political weapon is chilling. It deserves more attention, more investigation.
Okay, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's shift gears for a second. I want to talk about the Zapruder film. This article about the family's fight with the government over its value really got to me.
Fascinating, isn't it? Just a home movie, but it captures this pivotal moment in history. Suddenly it's worth millions.
More than just a home movie, though. It's the most important piece of visual evidence we have. It shows the sequence of events, the bullet trajectory, all these details that could help answer those lingering questions. But the ethical dilemma is what really stood out to me. The family has a right to their father's property, but this film has immense historical significance. Shouldn't it belong to the public?
It raises so many questions. Who owns historical artifacts? Private property rights versus the public's right to know? Can you profit from a tragedy like this? Tough issues, no easy answers.
It's a tough situation, for sure. Let's circle back to this theme of government secrecy, though. The sources you sent, especially Jeremy Gunn's testimony to Congress, paint a pretty bleak picture of the declassification process.
Jeremy Dunn, he was the executive director of the ARRB, so he had a front row seat to the whole thing. He talks about bureaucratic roadblocks, secretive agencies, this constant struggle between national security and the public's right to know.
He uses this phrase, 4 noble truths of declassification. Sounds almost spiritual, but he makes some good points.
He does. First, the reasons agencies give for keeping things classified often don't hold up. Second, they can't police themselves when it comes to declassification. Third, agencies resist releasing anything embarrassing or potentially incriminating. And finally, the burden of proof should be on the party who wants to keep the information secret, not the other way around.
Sounds like a constant uphill battle. Researchers and the public fighting for transparency while these powerful agencies keep everything hidden.
It's a battle that's still going on. Even with the JFK Act and the ARRB's work, there are still classified documents related to the assassination that we haven't seen.
So where does that leave us? What are the key takeaways from this deep dive so far?
It's clear that the assassination and the government's reaction to it had a huge impact on America. It eroded trust, fueled conspiracy theories, and raised fundamental questions about government transparency and accountability.
And it's a reminder that history isn't always neat and tidy.
It's messy, it's contested, full of unanswered questions. which is why it's so important to be a critical thinker. We can't just accept the official story, but we also can't blindly believe every conspiracy theory. Look at all sides, all the evidence.
Which is exactly what we're doing here. Looking at the evidence, considering different perspectives, and hopefully leaving you with more questions than answers.
Because sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. They make us think, challenge our beliefs, and keep searching for the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to find.
I love that.
And that's why we're here.
Absolutely. All right, well, we're about ready for a break, but don't worry, we'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into the mysteries surrounding the JFK assassination.
Looking forward to it.
Stay with us.
You know, when you think about this search for truth, that orders to kill document is a real curveball.
It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
If it's real, and it supposedly lays out instructions to eliminate MLK, I mean, that changes everything. We're not talking about a lone gunman anymore.
Exactly. It points to a conspiracy maybe reaching the highest levels of government, and it fits into a bigger historical context, too.
How so?
Well, think about COINTELPRO. That was the FBI's counterintelligence program, and we know they targeted civil rights leaders, often using pretty shady tactics, illegal even.
Right, I've heard of that.
If the orders to kill document is legit, it's a chilling example of how far they were willing to go, to silence dissent.
Yeah, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about what really went down.
It does, and it highlights why it's crucial to consider all the evidence, even the stuff that challenges the official narrative.
Okay, let's go back to Sirhan for a minute. The hypnoprogramming thing. I'm still a bit fuzzy on how that's supposed to work. Could you break it down for me?
Sure. Hypnoprogramming, it's basically using hypnosis to plant ideas or commands into someone's subconscious.
Okay.
The theory is that under hypnosis, you're more open to suggestion. And those suggestions, they can influence your behavior later on, even when you're not hypnotized anymore.
So someone could be hypnotized and told to commit a crime, and they wouldn't even remember doing it.
That's the basic idea, but it's a lot more complicated than that. There's a lot of debate about how well it actually works, you know, how much you can really make someone do something against their will.
What kind of evidence is there that Sirhan was actually hypnoprogrammed?
His lawyer points to a few things. They found notebooks filled with these repetitive phrases, almost like mantras. Things like, RFK must die, written over and over.
That's creepy.
Yeah. They argue this points to mind control techniques. And then there's Dr. Spiegel's testimony.
He was the hypnosis expert.
Right, Dr. Herbert Spiegel. He examined Sirhan and said he believed Sirhan was in a dissociative state when he shot Kennedy, meaning he wasn't fully aware of what he was doing. And that, according to Spiegel, could be consistent with someone who had been hypnoprogrammed.
Okay, so there's some evidence, but it's still pretty out there, right? I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It is controversial. A lot of people, especially in mainstream science, are very skeptical. They say there's no real proof that you can control someone's actions to that extent.
So where does that leave us? How do we even begin to evaluate this kind of evidence when there's so much disagreement?
I think it's important to keep an open mind, but also to be critical. You know, don't dismiss something just because it sounds crazy, but don't accept it blindly either. Look at the evidence carefully. And in Sirhan's case, there are definitely some unanswered questions that deserve more attention.
It all comes back to that idea of government secrecy. Are we getting the full story?
Absolutely. If there were powerful forces involved in these assassinations, they probably went to great lengths to cover it up, suppressing evidence, manipulating information, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so we've covered fingerprints, government secrecy, and mind control. What else should we be thinking about as we try to piece all of this together?
It's crucial to remember that history isn't some fixed, objective thing. It's constantly being rewritten and reinterpreted as new information emerges, as new perspectives come to light.
That's a good point.
Nope.
We can't just take the official narrative at face value.
Right. We have to question, dig deeper, consider alternative explanations. And I think the JFK assassination is a perfect illustration of that. It happened over 60 years ago, but new info is still coming out. People are still arguing about what really happened.
It reminds me of that Churchill quote, "History is written by the victors."
Exactly. And in the case of the JFK assassination, there's a strong case to be made that the truth has been buried. The real victors are the ones who've controlled the narrative.
So how do we break free from that narrative? How do we get closer to the truth?
I think it starts with being skeptical,
Yeah.
especially of those in power. Question authority, seek out alternative sources of information.
And be willing to do our own digging, like we're doing right now.
Exactly. Be your own historian. Don't just accept the stories you're given.
What are some specific steps we can take to be more critical, especially when it comes to something like the JFK assassination?
Well, first, understand the context. What else was happening in the world at the time? What were the political, social, economic forces at play?
We can't understand an event in isolation. Right. Got to see the bigger picture.
Right. And be aware of your own biases. We all come to this with our own preconceived notions. Recognize how that might influence how you interpret events.
So try to be as objective as possible.
As objective as you can be, but also be open to being wrong. If new evidence comes up or a convincing argument, be willing to change your mind.
Be open to new information. Okay. What else?
Always consider the source. Who wrote this? What's their background? Are they biased? Do they have an agenda?
So don't take things at face value. Do your own research, figure out who's saying what and why.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to dig deep. Look for primary sources whenever you can. Government documents, letters, diaries, eyewitness accounts, those are gold.
They can be so revealing. It's like you have a direct line to the past.
They offer a different perspective than you get from textbooks or articles written years later.
So to sum up this part of our discussion, it's all about being critical, questioning everything, doing the research, and being open to the fact that what we think we know might not be the whole truth.
That's it in a nutshell. And that applies not just to the JFK assassination, but to how we understand history in general. Always keep learning, question assumptions, and seek out the truth, even if it's hiding.
Well said. Now, let's talk about the Zapruder film.
Ah, yes, the home movie that turned into a national treasure. A key piece of evidence, and incredibly controversial. What about it caught your attention?
Well, besides the footage itself, which is obviously captivating, it's that ethical dilemma around who owns it. You've got the Zapruder family who technically own the film, and then the government and the public saying, hey, this is a pivotal moment in history. It belongs to everyone.
It's a classic clash. Private property rights versus the public good. Where do you draw the line? Does historical significance outweigh the owner's rights? It's a tough one.
It really is. And the government eventually bought the film from the family for a lot of money, but it sparked this whole debate about profiting from tragedy, about history becoming a commodity.
It's a debate that never really goes away. Some people say these artifacts are part of our shared heritage, that they should be accessible to everyone, copyright or not.
Others say, hey, property rights are fundamental. You can't just take something because it's historically important. It's complicated.
It is, and it shows how these competing interests clash in a democracy. We value individual rights, but we also want to preserve our history. For everyone. For future generations.
Going back to those four noble truths about declassification, it seems like getting to the truth is a constant struggle.
It is. Even with things like the JFK Act and the ARRB, there are still so many classified documents about the assassination that we just haven't seen.
Why is that? Why are they so determined to keep things secret, especially stuff that's decades old?
Well, there are a few reasons. There's this culture of secrecy in a lot of government agencies, especially those dealing with intelligence and national security. That's all need to know. And the default is to classify, not release.
Better safe than sorry. Right. At least that's how they see it.
Exactly. And then there's the fear of embarrassment. They don't want to admit mistakes, especially if those mistakes had serious consequences.
So they'd rather hide it than risk looking bad.
Unfortunately, yeah. And then you have the national security argument. Releasing information, even old information, could supposedly still be a threat.
But couldn't that just be an excuse? A way to keep things hidden that they just don't want us to know?
Definitely possible. And that's why the public needs to keep pushing for transparency, hold those agencies accountable, demand justification for keeping things classified.
So what can we do as individuals, I mean? How do we fight for transparency?
Stay informed. Pay attention to what's going on in government. Speak out against unnecessary secrecy. Support organizations that advocate for transparency and hold your elected officials accountable.
So basically, make it clear that we care about transparency and we're not going to tolerate secrecy for no good reason.
Exactly. And be persistent. This isn't a one-time thing. The fight for transparency is ongoing. It takes constant vigilance.
Okay, so we've talked about declassification, public pressure, all of that. Let's get back to the assassination itself. What are some of the biggest questions that are still unanswered after all this time?
Well, one of the most fundamental questions is, did Oswald really act alone? Or was there a conspiracy?
That's the question, isn't it? The one everyone's been asking since it happened.
It is, and we still don't have a definitive answer. The evidence is messy, there are arguments on both sides, it's complicated.
What evidence supports the idea that Oswald was part of something bigger? a conspiracy?
Well, for one, there's the fact that Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with ties to organized crime, shot and killed Oswald just 2 days after the assassination.
It feels like a scene from a movie.
It does, doesn't it? It instantly raised questions. Was Ruby acting alone, or was he silencing Oswald to protect someone or something bigger?
And what about Oswald's trip to Mexico City? That happened just weeks before the assassination, right?
Right. Officially, he visited the Cuban and Soviet embassies, supposedly tricked to get visas. But some researchers believe he might have met with others who were involved in the plot.
And then there's the whole magic bullet theory.
Ah, yes. The Warren Commission said that one bullet, fired by Oswald, went through Kennedy's neck, then through Governor Connolly's back, wrist, and thigh.
A lot of people have trouble believing that one.
For good reason. They argued that the bullet would have had to change direction in mid-air, defying physics.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And those are just a few of the many unanswered questions surrounding this event. It just keeps us fascinated, even after all these years.
It's a case that never gets old.
It's a testament to the power of mystery, to the human need to understand the past.
And a reminder that history isn't always what it seems.
Exactly. Question everything, seek out the truth, and don't be afraid to challenge the accepted narrative.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It has been a fascinating journey, but before we go, I want to leave our listener with a thought. If we accept that there are still unanswered questions about the JFK assassination, what does that say about our trust in institutions and our ability to truly get to the bottom of things?
That's a great question to ponder. It's tempting to believe that the official investigations uncovered the whole truth, but when you dig deeper, you see these loose ends, these inconsistencies. It makes you wonder if we're getting the complete picture.
It does, doesn't it? It underscores the importance of critical thinking, of doing your own research. We can't just accept what we're told, especially when dealing with events of this magnitude.
So for those listening who are hooked on this topic, what resources would you recommend? Where should they go to learn more?
Oh, there's a wealth of information out there. The Assassination Archives and Research Center is a great starting point. They have a massive collection of documents, photographs, all sorts of materials related to the case.
And there's the online JFK Records collection, a treasure trove of primary sources, government documents, declassified files. You could spend days just browsing through it all.
It's incredible how much is available online now. It empowers everyone to become their own investigator, dig into the evidence, and form their own conclusions.
It's like taking history into your own hands.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so exciting. It's not just static facts and dates. It's dynamic. It's constantly being reinterpreted and re-examined.
And the JFK assassination is a prime example of that, a case that will likely continue to be debated for years to come.
I have no doubt about that. And that's a good thing. It means we're still grappling with those fundamental questions the assassination brought up. Power, secrecy, truth.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you for guiding us through all of this. It's been a fascinating and sometimes mind-boggling journey.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always rewarding to discuss history with someone as curious and engaged as you are.
And to our listeners, thank you for sharing these incredible sources with us, for joining us on this exploration into one of America's most enduring mysteries. Keep questioning, keep digging, and never stop searching for the truth. It really does make you think. You know, it's easy to just assume the official story is the whole story, but then you start digging and you see all these loose ends, these inconsistencies. It's like, wait a minute, are we really getting the whole truth here?
Exactly. And it shows how important critical thinking is, doing your own research. We can't just passively accept what we're told, especially with something this important, this impactful.
So for our listener, who's clearly hooked on this, what are some good resources? Where should they go to learn more?
There's so much out there. The Assassination Archives and Research Center is a great place to start. They have tons of documents, photos, all kinds of stuff related to the case.
Oh, and the online JFK Records collection? That's a goldmine, really.
Yeah.
Primary sources, government documents, declassified files. You could spend days just going through it all.
It's amazing what's available online now. You can be your own investigator these days, you know? Dig into the evidence and come to your own conclusion.
You really can.
Yeah.
It's like taking history into your own hands.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so fascinating, right? It's not just some dead subject. It's alive. It's constantly evolving as new information comes out and we reinterpret things.
The JFK assassination is a perfect example of that. It's a case that'll probably be debated for generations to come.
I have no doubt. And that's good, I think. It means we're still wrestling with these big questions the assassination raised. Power, secrecy, the pursuit of truth. These things matter.
They do. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you for walking us through all of this. It's been fascinating, even a bit overwhelming at times.
It was my pleasure, truly. Always a joy to talk about history with someone as curious and engaged as you.
And to everyone listening, thank you for sending us these sources, and thank you for joining us as we explored this, one of America's most enduring mysteries. Keep those questions coming, keep digging, and never stop searching for the truth.